Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Jawad Tehami and these are the headlines. Mali's President Ibrahim Boubacar Keita has been forced to resign after military detained him and Prime Minister Beau Sis in a coup. In a televised address, Keita said he has dissolved the parliament to avoid bloodshed in the country. The military said they have a plan to form a civilian transitional government that will hold fresh elections. Pakistan says the global humanitarian fraternity should help ameliorate the worsening humanitarian situation in Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir. In a statement issued on World Humanitarian Day, the Foreign Office called on the global community to urge India to lift the year-long draconian military siege. Brazil has reported more than 1,300 deaths and over 47,000 COVID-19 cases in the past 24 hours, while the US has recorded more than 1,200 deaths overnight, raising the toll to over 171,000 with nearly 5.5 million infections. India has recorded the highest daily death toll of 1,092, taking the total to nearly 53,000 with more than 2.7 million infected. In Pakistan, 11 deaths since yesterday have taken the toll to 6,201 with a case load of above 290,000 infections. Globally, the pandemic has infected over 22 million people and claimed more than 779,000 lives. Those are the headlines and detailed stories right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. Mali's President Ibrahim Boubacar Keita has been forced to resign after the military detained him and Prime Minister Beau Sis in a coup. In a televised address, Keita said he has dissolved the parliament to avoid bloodshed in the country. The military said they plan to form a civilian transitional government which will hold fresh elections. More in this report.
After months of violent protests in the country, Mali's military detained the president and prime minister. The protest movement accused Keita of corruption and worsening the security situation in the north and central regions. The opposition coalition says the ouster is not a mutiny, but a popular insurrection of the corrupt. Ex-President Keita says he had no choice but to step down.
If today it pleased some elements of our armed forces to conclude that it should end with their intervention, do I really have a choice? Because I do not wish for any bloodshed to be spilled to keep me in office. That is why I wish right now, whilst thanking the people of Mali for joining me throughout these long years with warmth and affection, to announce my decision to resign from this moment.
In Bamako, hours of uncertainty followed after Keita's detention. The soldiers mutinied in the morning at the Kati military base where Keita was taken and rounded up a number of senior civilian officials and military officers. The dissolution of the government was followed by mass celebrations in Bamako's Independence Square. France and regional powers have condemned the ouster, while the UN has demanded an immediate and unconditional release of the president. The UN Security Council has also called an urgent meeting today to discuss the situation in Mali.
Israeli warplanes have attacked the Gaza Strip in another night of intense violence. No casualties have been reported from the raids so far. The Israeli Defense Ministry says it struck Hamas military compound in retaliation to a rocket and explosive balloons. Eyewitnesses say at least 2 airstrikes hit a point belonging to Izzeddin al-Qasim brigades in southeastern Gaza. This is Israel's 8th consecutive strike on Hamas as tensions have been rising for over a week. Israel has also closed the Karim Abu Salim goods crossing with the Gaza Strip. Pakistan says it will never recognize the state of Israel until a just and fair solution to the Palestinian issue. In an interview, Prime Minister Imran Khan said accepting Israel is equivalent to giving up Pakistan's stance on Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Khan said the Palestine issue is similar to Kashmir as their rights have been snatched while they suffer from Israeli atrocities. He said Pakistan's founder Muhammad Ali Jinnah made it clear in 1948 that Israel cannot be recognized under these circumstances. Khan debunked rumors that Pakistan's relations with Saudi Arabia have deteriorated, saying Islamabad has fraternal ties with Riyadh. Pakistan says the global humanitarian fraternity should help ameliorate the worsening situation in Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir. In a statement issued on the World Humanitarian Day, the Foreign Office called on the global community to urge India to lift the year-long military siege. The statement said Islamabad reiterates the need for evolving a strategic approach to address humanitarian emergencies. It also said humanitarian workers in Pakistan have helped more than 3 million Afghans during COVID-19 crisis. Meanwhile, in his message, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said humanitarian workers are effectively responding to the global crisis of coronavirus. Syria says several rockets exploded in the premises of a U.S. military base in the north of Deir az-Zor governorate. State media said the attack targeted the U.S. base near the Knok oil field controlled by the U.S. and Kurdish troops. This is the first ever attack on one of the 12 military facilities created by the United States since 2015 in Syria's 3 governorates. No casualties have been reported so far. Meanwhile, Russia says its army general has been killed in a roadside bomb blast in Deir az-Zor, while 3 servicemen are wounded. Earlier, unidentified jets bombed several towns in rebel-held northwestern Idlib in a new flare-up of violence. Iraq says it has killed 10 ISIS militants in an operation in the northern Karachok mountain. In a statement, Iraqi military says it conducted a joint operation with the coalition forces. It said 9 caves used by the militants were also destroyed in the operation. The operation comes as ISIS has intensified attacks on the security forces, including Hasht al-Shabi forces. Militants gained full control in Mosul, Saladin and Amba provinces and seized territories in Diyala and Kirkuk provinces in 2014. But Iraqi security forces managed to regain control in subsequent years. Belarus President Alexander Lukashenko has ordered authorities to end protests against the August 9 presidential election in Minsk. In a meeting, he said state workers who went on strike as part of the protests would not be allowed to return to their jobs. He also ordered authorities to step up security at the country's western border. This comes as the members of the European Council are holding an emergency summit to discuss the situation in Belarus. Well, opposition leader Svetlana Tynskaya has urged the European Union to support the protesters' demands. Lukashenko, who has run Belarus for 26 years, is facing massive protests over the election that gave him over 80% of the vote. But the opposition labeled the vote as fraud. In the U.S., the Democratic Party has formally nominated Joe Biden as a presidential candidate at the largely virtual national convention. Biden called the nomination a lifetime honor with his acceptance speech scheduled for Thursday. During the 4-day event, Democrats vouched for Biden's candidacy, vowing to heal a divided nation. The convention's second night was held under the theme of Leadership Matters. Former presidents Jimmy Carter and Bill Clinton, rising Democrats and notable Republicans said Biden will return integrity to the White House. The speakers criticized the U.S. President Donald Trump's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic and his willingness to corrupt democratic institutions.
At a time like this, the Oval Office should be a command center. Instead, it's a storm center. There's only chaos. Just one thing never changes: his determination to deny responsibility and shift the blame. The buck never stops there. Now you have to decide whether to renew his contract or hire someone else.
U.S. President Donald Trump says he has postponed the trade talks with China over Beijing's unthinkable handling of COVID-19. Speaking in Arizona, Trump said he is not interested in holding a dialogue with Beijing at the moment. U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer, Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin, and Chinese Vice Premier Liu He was scheduled to conduct a 6-month review of the trade agreement last week before it was indefinitely postponed. White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows said no new high-level talks have been scheduled between Washington and Beijing. When asked if he will pull out of the trade deal, Trump said he had not made a decision before taking a swipe at Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden. A U.S. Senate Intelligence Committee says Russia did influence the 2016 presidential election to help Donald Trump's campaign. The Republican-led panel released its 5th and final report on its probe into election interference. The report says WikiLeaks played a key role in the meddling and very likely knew it was assisting Russian intelligence. It alleged former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort worked with the Russians, including oligarch Oleg Deripaska. The report claims President Vladimir Putin personally directed Russian hacking efforts to breach computer networks affiliated with the Democratic Party. It stops short of accusing the Trump campaign of colluding with Moscow to sway the election.
This report is 1,000 pages long, twice as long as the Mueller report. I would urge every American to read it, to draw their own conclusions. Unprecedented amount of Russian intervention and a myriad of contacts with individuals affiliated and associated with the Trump campaign.
The bipartisan investigation lasted almost 3.5 years. Now, moving on, the U.S. says it has informed Russia of its terms for extending a landmark treaty that limits their deployed strategic nuclear weapons. Talking to reporters, U.S. negotiator Marshall Billingsley said now the ball is in Russia's court on the 2010 new Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty. Billingsley said those terms include addressing Moscow's buildup of shorter-range nuclear weapons that are not covered by the treaty. This comes after U.S. envoys the latest round of talks in Vienna with Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov. Ryabkov said Russia stands for an extension of the START treaty, but is not ready to pay any price for that. Meanwhile, Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu discussed strengthening trust measures in a phone call with U.S. Defense Secretary Mark Esper. Brazil has reported more than 1,300 deaths and over 47,000 COVID-19 cases in the past 24 hours, while the U.S. has recorded more than 1,200 deaths overnight, raising the toll to over 171,000 with nearly 5.5 million infections. Now, globally, the pandemic has infected over 22.1 million people and claimed more than 780,000 lives. Details in this report.
Thousands are dying and getting infected worldwide daily by the new coronavirus as governments scramble to secure vaccine deals. Brazil has approved the final stage trials for Johnson & Johnson's experimental vaccine, the fourth to get a nod for testing in the country. In Argentina, government has reimposed lockdowns in parts of the country as cases tally crossed 305,000. Mexican health officials say the virus is on a steady decline in the country after reporting a drop in fatalities during the past week.
The trend is clear. Some indicators I will comment on in the slides consistently show the number of daily cases are decreasing, including the numbers of deaths, which have been very unfortunate, each and every one of them, but they have been in sustained decline for more than 6 weeks. Hospitalization have also decreased.
In Europe, the second wave is surging in many countries as governments reimpose lockdowns. Over in Australia, the government has secured a deal with British drug maker AstraZeneca for a potential vaccine, saying free doses will be provided to the public. While WHO Chief Tedros Ghebreyesus says the world needs to prevent vaccine nationalism.
It's critical that countries don't repeat the same mistakes. We need to prevent vaccine nationalism. And for this reason, WHO is working with governments and the private sector to both accelerate the science through the ACT Accelerator and ensure that new innovations are available to everyone, everywhere, starting with those at highest risk.
Mainland China has reported a further decline in cases with no new domestic transmissions, but only 17 imported new cases. In South Korea, the daily cases have hit a 5-month high with 297 infections being reported in the past 24 hours.
Moving on to India, which has reported the highest daily COVID-19 death toll with 1,092 fatalities. With new fatalities, the countrywide toll has jumped to almost 53,000. The Health Ministry says 64,531 new cases were recorded overnight, bringing the country's caseload to over 2.7 million. It said there are still over 676,000 active cases in the country. The ministry said Maharashtra and Tamil Nadu states make up 40% of all the confirmed cases. India still remains the third worst hit country from the infection after the US and Brazil. Pakistan is observing a downward trend in COVID-19 active cases. The Health Ministry said over 90% of the patients have recovered from the virus so far. The ministry said 11 people have died while 613 people tested positive in the past 24 hours. The country's death toll has risen to 6,201, while the infections are over 290,000. The ministry said the number of active cases has reduced to nearly 12,000. Sindh remains the worst hit province with over 126,000 infections, while Punjab has reported more than 95,000 cases. More stories to follow, but right after a short break, stay tuned. Welcome back. Heavy monsoon rains across India have triggered floods and landslides, killing as many as 868 people across several states. The season lasts from June to September and wreaks havoc across South Asia every year. The flooding in recent days has seen houses swept away and agricultural crops destroyed in various regions. Millions have been affected, with many stranded in fast-flowing waters. Rescue teams have been deployed to the worst-affected regions. The India Met Department has warned that more heavy rains are expected in the northwestern regions of the country. In China's Sichuan province, about 130,000 people have been evacuated after floods hit Yangtze River and threatened a 1,200-year-old Buddha statue. State media said rescue workers used sandbags to protect the 71-meter sculpture as water submerged its doors for the first time since 1949. The UNESCO World Heritage Site in Leshan City is surrounded by swollen rivers due to heavy rains. The Yangtze Water Resources Commission has declared a red alert, saying water was expected to exceed the safe level by over 5 meters. The Water Ministry said increased water discharge from the reservoirs will see water inflows rise to 74,000 cubic meters per second, the highest since it was built. Southern China has been hit by torrential rains this flood season, affecting over 54 million people since July. Fires are ravaging Brazil's Pantanal, the world's largest wetland. Thousands of species, including jaguars, anteaters, and migratory birds, live in up to 160,000 square kilometer area. More in this report.
The Pantanal straddles the borders of Brazil, Paraguay, and Bolivia, with Brazil containing the lion's share. According to WWF, the region is one of the most biodiverse places on the planet, with more than 4,700 plants and animal species. Brazil's National Space Research Agency, INPE, has registered 3,121 fires in the first 15 days of August. This is nearly 5 times higher than in the same period a year ago.
The challenge for us is to fight the fires here in Pantanal. It's a hot environment, very dry, strong winds, and high temperatures. We found several conversion points along the way, places where planes and brigades are helping to extinguish the fires.
Government data shows roughly 8,500 square kilometers, or nearly 6% of the Pantanal, burned from January to July. A local newspaper reported that most of the largest sanctuary for the blue hyacinthine macaw parrots has gone up in flames this year.
The impact of the fires is enormous. This is a very large mescal breeding ground, as well as that of other animals. I just found a dead deer and a monkey and a dead monkey. The destruction will be enormous.
At the current pace, fires could approach the all-time record for any month since the records began in 1998. The blazes in the Pantanal comes amid rising concerns about fires in the Amazon, its much larger neighbor to the north.
US software giant Oracle has entered the race to acquire popular Chinese-owned short video app TikTok. President Donald Trump has vowed to shut the app down unless it is taken over by a US company by mid-September. Oracle said it had preliminary talks with TikTok's Chinese owner, ByteDance. The company said it is considering purchasing the app's operations in the US, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. Microsoft has been the lead contender to buy TikTok since it made the announcement earlier this month. ByteDance is opposed to selling any assets beyond those in the US, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. European markets are trading higher as investors follow the positive sentiment on Wall Street, where the S&P 500 and Nasdaq Composite set new overnight records. Investors also continue to monitor developments in the US-China trade war. The Pan-European Stock 600 edged slightly higher. London's FTSE 100 has risen by 0.33%. Earlier, Asian Pacific markets traded mixed, with Seoul's Kospi and Nikkei 225 leading the gains. Oil and gas stocks shed 0.2%, while telecoms gained 0.6%. In football, Paris Saint-Germain have outclassed RB Leipzig by 3-0 to reach the final of the Champions League at Stadio de Luge. In their first Champions League final, the Parisians will face either Lyon or Bayern Munich on Sunday. Playing in Lisbon, Marquinhos, Angel Di Maria and Juan Bernat struck for the French side. PSG's only other European final appearances include UEFA Cup Winners' Cup finals in 1996 and 1997. The club have gone out in the last 16 for the past 3 years, while Leipzig reached the last 4 only 11 years after their creation. Now moving on, in the National Basketball Association, Blazers beat top seed Los Angeles Lakers by 100 points to 93 in the opening game of their Western Conference first round playoff series in the Disney World. Portland's Damian Lillard continued his hot streak as he scored 34 points, while CJ McCollum bagged 21 points to down the Lakers. Meanwhile, Rockets downed the Oklahoma City Thunder 123-108 in their game as Houston's James Harden scored 37 points. Elsewhere, the 8th-seeded Orlando produced a surprise 122-110 points victory over the top-seeded Milwaukee Bucks. Earlier, Miami defeated the Indiana Pacers by 113 points to 101, with Jimmy Butler hitting a game-high 28 points. Another weather situation from around the globe. And that is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News.